When you've gone through a hard time, has somebody said, oh, it'll all work out? And you're thinking, no, it probably won't. This is really shitty. That's what we're going to be talking about today. So go ahead and leave a 5-star review. If you ever want more information, go to livebrighter.info and let's talk about it. So there's many times, like growing up, I heard this verse. It's Romans 8:28. It says, all things work together for good for those that love God and are called according to his purpose. So what I would say is you can just, if you love God, you're called according to his purpose. And so there's a promise there that says all things are going to work together for good. And that's a tough one. I mean, there's a lot of really crappy stuff that goes on in our lives. So in my story, let's talk about that. There was one time I really challenged God on this. I'm like, I don't see how this could ever work out for good. And so this was the situation. So 5 years into my marriage that was destructive, and having a baby and having undiagnosed Hashimoto's and having just a whole kind of meltdown physically and mentally, not sleeping for a year. It was just horrible, and I ended up in a psych ward, and that was just a terrible experience. While I was there, I had my shoulder that was injured. There was a little bit of abuse going on. There were good things about it. That was the first time I had ever heard of anything about self-care and caring for yourself, which is funny that I had to learn that there. But it was overall very challenging. That was the darkest days. More than anything, I wanted to be with my daughter. I also wanted a divorce at that time because I knew how destructive the marriage was for me. But it was very strange. Like they didn't, at the psych ward, they didn't really care about the circumstances. They just wanted you on medication with a diagnosis. And that was very strange. Thankfully, I feel like there's a lot less of that going on, and they're looking at the whole person, which is hugely important, because at that point I got a misdiagnosis that kind of left me in the situation. So I had a choice at that time to go back to my husband, which I didn't want to do, but at that time I realized I would lose my daughter, and I was like, I do not want to do that. And so I actually quit the divorce paperwork and what I was doing and chose to go back, which was difficult, and it was very hard. So, and then I also embraced the diagnosis that I had, because I'm like, okay, maybe it's not my marriage. Everyone's telling me that I'm blowing it up and this and that. It was very hard having people speak into my life and say that it's actually the bipolar, this isn't, your marriage is fine. And that's obviously what I was hearing from my husband as well, because he was on the spectrum. And so basically everything that came out of his brain was truth, and everything that I saw things or how I perceived things was not true, because it wasn't coming out of his brain, which is a great setup for gaslighting. So basically I eventually just embraced, the quote unquote mental illness and went with it, even though I'm like, this doesn't seem right, and went with it. And so that was the really darkest day. I remember getting out of the psych ward, and I remember just having a frank conversation with God and being like, you promise, you say all things are going to work out for good. And I said, I'd like to see that happen with this. So good luck with that. And that was my attitude. But I did love God, and that was just a horrible experience that I didn't understand. And I really had a hard time thinking how he could ever work that out for good. But there were 4 things that came out of that for good. It took a while, and it came in seasons, but these are some of the 4 things. First of all, it really made me aware of mental illness and have a lot of compassion. And rather than hiding my diagnosis and this and that within the Christian community, because it was, not popular, I just started speaking up about it and found out that there were a lot of people suffering, and a lot of people, I would say it was like a third of the people I knew were on medication, and that was all hush hush. So just opened the door to talk about it, and had a lot of compassion with that. I also learned a lot about my body and my mind. So this put me on a journey of like, okay, this is not making sense. I was having hyperthyroid symptoms, but my test came back normal, which I found out they did the wrong test. Things like that. But it was a whole learning process for my body and my mind, and getting reconnected. Honestly, being in a psych ward and saying, hey, that's part of my story, has created a lot of humility and just being empathetic. So that would be the 3rd thing I got out of it. And the 4th thing is I'm very passionate about helping others coming out of domestic destruction and religious abuse to help them through what they're going through, because I knew what it was like. I felt like I couldn't get out of it. I felt like I didn't have the support, and financially, I didn't know how I could do it. And so that's why I got into real estate, and I started a nonprofit called Hope Harbor Transitional Living that is just finishing getting its nonprofit status, and that's to help women with rental support and counseling in order to get out of situations that are really destructive like that. And so it's kind of been a part of my passion, is my my pain. So that was my story and all of that. I'm a pretty kind, easygoing person, helpful. I get along well with others. What? You're saying that makes me a target for selfish and narcissistic people? That's terrible. I don't want relationships like that. If you would like to see how large your kind girl bullseye is, take the quiz below. The best example I've heard about Romans 8:28 was just recently, and it was a pastor talking about baking cookies. And you've got your soda, your sugar, your flour, and all of that. And our lives are kind of like a batch of cookies, where there's really horrible times, the baking soda, that on its own would taste horrible to eat. And then there's times that are sweet, like the brown sugar, and that's great. And then there's times like, chocolate chips. There's the flour, which is just not good to just eat by itself. So there's just these different ingredients, and in the end, we have the promise that it's all going to work together for good, and we can count on that. It doesn't mean that it's good at the moment. In fact, it's probably terrible, and I'm sorry if you're going through something. I know how that feels. But there is this promise, so let's talk about it some more. Another way is how we look at things, and I really liked a couple phrases that came across is rejection is God's protection and redirection. I'm going to say that again. Rejection is God's protection and redirection. So, a lot of us have had like rejection or what seems like rejection in a job or a relationship. And, since my focus on domestically destructive relationships, that's a lot of rejection that can come from that. But it can be God's protection and redirection, and that makes a big difference. When I first got divorced, you could really tell the quality of my growth by the guys I dated. So after I got out of the destructive marriage, I started to date. And the first guy that I dated, he was one of those people when you meet him, you're like, I just could tell, being like a kind of a good girl, that this was not a good guy. But I was having an existential crisis where I didn't trust my body. I didn't trust things. He said all the right things. And so he's like, I'm pretty sure he has an alcohol problem. But, he said the right things and this and that. And I really wasn't very educated as far as alcoholism and all of that. So it was very interesting. Eventually, though, I was just feeling more just distressed by it. And I asked God for clarity. I'm like, God, make things really clear. And when you ask that, it's always interesting what happens, because he made things abundantly clear. I found out he was trying to find a way to meet up with one of my friends and trying to cheat on me, basically. And also, I found some porn on his phone, which I'm like, oh, dude, I don't date guys that do porn. I just don't. So there was just everything that came like all at once. And I just kind of laugh at that relationship, because it showed me, first of all, how much I needed to grow. Because I'm like, gosh, that relationship actually felt better than my marriage. And because even though, he was really not a good guy, he was telling me how he felt, even if it was like not in a nice way. And for me, that was so refreshing compared to stonewalling all the time and constant stonewalling. So I went to my counselor and I just had to tell him, I'm like, wow, I'm really messed up, because when I look at this guy and I think that is better, my bar is so low. So we got to work on this. So I had to do a lot of work just to heal myself and, the appreciation and the love of myself, and take care of myself. So that was a whole process, and we talk a lot about that in this podcast. Another phrase that I really like is if somebody has lost appreciation or quits valuing you, I think it's destiny that they are not assigned to your future, because you cannot make somebody appreciate and value you. If all of a sudden, they stop and there's nothing you can work on to mend that, they're not assigned to your future, and that That's just how it is. It can be very hard, but that is the truth of it. They're just not assigned to your future, and God has better plans for you. So I'm going to talk about 5 things that you can help do if you've gone through a really hard time and you're like, how is this going to work out for good? Because I'm not saying it was really awful. So the first one is hold God to his promise. I mean, he says stuff in the Bible, and I think you could totally hold him to it. And have an honest conversation. Like, this is terrible. I don't see how you could work this out for good. Make it, I make it happen. Like, good luck with it. And that was my thing, is good luck with that. So I think you can hold God to his promise. The second one is really feel the feelings and protect from bitterness. So what I mean is, like, if there's rejection and pain, to really just feel it and allow yourself to grieve, do what you need to do for a time. Because I'm like, gosh, you could like grieve really long time. I would give myself blocks of time just to process and grieve, and then be like, okay, now I'm going to like choose some right thinking and work forward. But I really did hold space for myself to feel the feelings. And it's a great way to guard from bitterness, because if you're not feeling the feelings and you're kind of resisting and you're upset, it's easy to get really bitter. So the third thing, after you hold God to his promises, feel the feelings, and protect for bitterness, is 3, accept that you may not understand for a very long time. That's a hard one, but just trusting that God is good is a hard one. And if you do, he will show you. You will see it in the, like, there's a verse, it's like, you will see God's goodness in the land of the living. And I just say, hold on to that. The 4th is consider a new way to look at the situation. I mean, there's a lot of ways I can look at my, basically domestically destructive marriage of 22 years. I mean, I could say, oh my goodness, that was a huge waste of time, and and just super painful, and all this stuff I could say. But really, I choose to look at it as a stepping stone to where I am now, and to really learn what a healthy relationship is and what it is for me, and then being able to actually call in the man of my dreams and the relationship of my dreams that I have now with my husband, Michael. So I just keep knowing that it's a stepping stone. And there was a period there where there was no man, even though for me, I actually did want to get married. The first marriage did not feel like a marriage. It was definitely not a oneness at all. And I really felt that that was possible, even though I'd never experienced it. So I really wanted to experience that. And so I just had to have faith that God put that in me and create a space for that, and then just live the abundant life until that happened. So that's how that worked out. And then the 5th thing is just know that God has a plan for you far above what you can even imagine. And the good verse for that is Ephesians 3:20, and really hold to that. So the 5 things to help you, again, is hold to God and his promise that he can work all things out for the good. And that may take time. 2nd, feel the feelings and protect yourself from bitterness. 3, accept you may not understand for a long time. 4 is consider new ways to look at your situation and the circumstances, if it was God's protection or redirection. And 5th, know that he has a super good plan for you, far above what you can ask or imagine. Go ahead and share this. If you want more information, go to livebrighter.info. Grow 1% a day and live brighter. I believe in you. Let your light shine.